Hi, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Today we're taking a look at this original Peter Berry signed Golden Age American long rifle. Peter Berry of the Dauphin County School was among the most talented master craftsmen of the post-Revolutionary War Golden Age in American long rifle craftsmanship. The Kentucky Rifle Foundation states Peter Berry, deceased 1796, is regarded as a grand master of the Dauphin, Lebanon region. He was taxed as a gunsmith in Heidelberg Township, Dauphin County from 1786 to 1796. His distinct rifles reflect excellent craftsmanship and engraving, and genuine specimens are rare and especially desirable. This example is pictured on page 271 of Joe Kindig Jr.'s classic book, Thoughts on the Kentucky Rifle in its Golden Age. The barrel is a smoothbore and has a dovetailed brass blade front sight and a dovetail iron rear notch sight. A crisp P.E. Berry signature can be found on the top barrel flat towards the breech. The rifle features a plain single trigger and an unmarked lock with a faceted pan and gooseneck cock. The brass engraving has well executed but subtle, refined engraving. Despite the many consistencies in Berry's work, broadly, his carving designs vary widely, but all clearly demonstrate his talents as a carver. Kindig wrote, Peter Berry carved beautiful designs of sea scrolls with some flowers in high relief. The fact that no two guns are carved alike attests to his versatility. End quote. The intricate details of the accents and the sea scrolls on the left side of the butt that flow off of the back of the cheek piece are certainly excellent examples of his craftsmanship. I would like to thank you for joining me today on this short tour of this Peter Berry long rifle. We're going to start at the butt plate and work our way forward, covering the details of this piece. We have a brass butt plate here with 5 facets across the top, with a wedding band motif filed into the butt plate towards the front tang of the butt plate. The butt plate itself is held on with a screw at the top and a screw at the rear. I would like to note that in its current state, we have a small dent or fracture in the butt plate across the toe and a matching crack in the stock across the toe. Not mentioning that to detract at all from the craftsmanship or preservation of this piece. Across the top of the crest of this long rifle, we have something not largely seen in American long rifles, let alone Berry's work. Emanating from our brass butt plate tang, we have some beautiful brass wire inlay here. This inlay runs the course of the crest, stopping about 4/5 or so from the end of the nose of the crest. This wire inlay duplicates shapes of leaf pattern scrolls. We have multiple scrolls flowing over each other before the wire inlay terminates in an undulating line that runs up the crest. On the patch box side of our stock here, we have a beautiful brass patch box with multiple windows, allowing us to still see the grain of the stock in what would typically be underneath the patch box. Our front ornamental finial of the patch box is held on with 3 screws. The patch box itself is decorated with extremely fine, shallow, and elegant engraving, in my opinion, around the border of the windows and the scroll motifs around the box. The flower motif is cut as well, with some shade lines in the scrolls of the leaves supporting the flower. The patch box itself has a simple border engraving. The hinge is made up of 5 knuckles. The patch box fins on either side of the patch box cavity are held on with copper and brass tacks. The brass tacks all but disappear into the brass patch box. 2 copper tacks, one on either panel, are left in contrast. Our patch box release is found in the brass toe plate. The toe plate itself mimics the same stylized engraving and shape patterns that we see on the patch box itself, as well as the wire inlay on the top of the crest. The toe plate itself is held on with 2 screws, and our patch box release is a rectangular piece of iron between the screws. When depressed, this patch box release opens our patch box, and we can see yet another unfinished wood cavity that has had material removed with a set of drills along with some chisels. Forward of our toe plate, we have matching brass wire inlay traveling from the fore end of our toe plate, undulating back and forth, connecting here with the rearward most part of our trigger guard. On either side of our buttstock, we have 2 crisp molding lines cut into the butt plate as well as the stock. These lines travel forward through the wrist, underneath the lock plate, and terminate at the lock mortise carving. Forward of our patch box, we have the beginning of the execution of Barry's relief scroll pattern carving here. This scroll work starts with some reliefed lines at the nose of the crest, traveling rearward into the stock before transitioning into a tight C-scroll pattern that drops one incised curved line back towards the patch box. At the wrist, about a 1/16 of an inch forward from the termination of our crest and nose here, we have a silver extussion plate held in by 2 brass nails or tacks. The silver extussion plate is left empty apart from an engraved border surrounding the exterior of the extussion. As we move forward, we get to the tang and breech area of the rifle. This area does show some wear and evidence of use since its construction in the late 18th century. We see wear and discoloration on the metal, like we see in many muzzleloaders, at the tang and breech area due to the explosion that initiates each shot. Our barrel tang is held in with a single bolt or screw here, and on either side of our tang, which is rounded at the end, we have more relief carved scrolls here, terminating as multiple scrolls travel back towards our wrist extussion plate. The carving here in this area is much more worn than the carving that we see over here in our wrist area, as well as the carving that we will see on the cheek rest side of our buttstock. This is a common area for us to see wear in carving and engraving because this is where our hand intersects and rubs on the stock each time it is fired. On our lock side of this same area, we have our flintlock mechanism. Again, this lock is unmarked. One major detail here, though, is we have a gooseneck cock and we have a 3-faceted base to our flintlock pan. The lock plate itself is flat with beveled edges all the way around. We have 2 vertical lines separating the lock plate body from the tail at the rear. Forward a few inches here on our top barrel flat, you can see our P.E. Barry finely engraved into this barrel. I mention the fine engraving of this signature because the lines and the curves can be seen duplicated in the engraving of our patch box and the other engraving and carving on this piece. They aren't direct copies of these curves, but you can tell that the same hand cut these curves in the same way on this signature as they were cut, in my opinion at least, of this patch box. Jumping back to the underside of the rifle here for a moment, we have a multifaceted brass trigger guard here held in with multiple pins. I want to make a note here that our front trigger guard fastening pin that holds the guard to the stock is visible on this rifle on both sides. It is very common for this front trigger guard pin to be visible only from our side plate side, but on this piece we can see the pin poking through the lock plate or the lock carved mortise on our lock plate side. An interesting note about this trigger guard and trigger assembly, the trigger plate and trigger are not in line with the trigger guard as we see in some other rifles from the period. The trigger plate and with it the trigger assembly are stepped to the left if the rifle is positioned upright. This trigger plate, at least at the front end, is about 1/8 of an inch to the left of our trigger guard, again, not in line. The front of our trigger plate is held onto the stock with the end of our barrel tang bolt that travels from the tang through the stock, intersecting and threading into our trigger plate. The rear of the trigger plate looks as if it is held in through pressure from the trigger guard bow. Forward of our trigger guard, note the discoloration, or the change in color, I should say, from our butt stock. This area of the forestock is a very common balance point for these original rifles, and it's very common for us to see a change in color of the stock in this area from that constant wear of the hand or how the rifle was carried. Several inches forward here of our trigger guard, just about in line with our rear sight on the top flat of the barrel, we have the beginning or ending, depending on which end you're focusing on, of some incised line scroll carving that transitions around our brass entry pipe and into our ramrod channel molding. Now, this carving is in a high wear section, and we can see an amount of high wear on our brass entry pipe here when we compare it to our other brass ramrod pipes. Going along with the change in color of the stock here, we have softened edges on our ramrod entry pipe here, indicating again that this portion of the stock saw some wear and use when this rifle was carried in the field. Along with that, the incised line carving here, these scrolls emanating from our ramrod entry pipe, are all but flat against the stock. It's really remarkable how little material has established these scrolls into this stock, depending on the angle in which you are viewing it. It is possible that these carvings were more refined and have since worn down with age, or it is possible, just as much in my opinion, that these were simple incised line carvings and were never established as deep as some of the relief carving seen on this rifle. Our ramrod channel moldings, like I said, come out of our incised line carving at our entry pipe and travel the entirety of our forestock, terminating in front of our first ramrod pipe at the muzzle, and then the second traveling all the way to our brass nose cap at the front. Our two forward brass ramrod pipes are very typical for the period. They have round wedding bands at either end and facets in the center. Some evidence of these facets and wedding bands still exists on our entry pipe, but it is again much softer and has been worn down over time. Our brass nose cap is held on with various tacks or nails, two most prominently on either side of the forestock. Our notch rear sight can be found forward along the barrel, forward of our P. Berry signature here, and we can see the dovetail. We have some material from the barrel folded up almost over and on top of our rear sight, encapsulating it so it cannot or should not fall off in the field. We have a brass blade front sight, and I want to make a mention here, as with many of these original long rifles, how shallow both the blade front sight and the notch rear sight are. These are very close to the top barrel flat, minimizing, in theory, snagging when traveling through a wooded or brushy area on the frontier, and providing just enough visibility for a marksman behind the trigger to use without the excess of material. Now, we mentioned that this is a smooth bore barrel, but we still have been calling it a rifle for a multitude of reasons. One, we have a fully octagon barrel from the breech to the muzzle. Second, we have a front and a rear sight system, commonly referred to in some cases as a smooth rifle. These characteristics of the octagonal barrel, the front and rear sight system, and a smoothbore barrel still dictates in a lot of collector and historian nomenclature that we refer to this as a smooth rifle, or still call it an American long rifle, despite the barrel being a smooth bore. In addition to the characteristics of the barrel, we still have the inclusion of a patch box at the rear, which commonly is not seen on many smoothbore or fowling pieces from the period. While being smoothbore, the barrel measures at a 47 caliber. Flipping over to our side plate side here, you can see the duplication of our ramrod channel molding. This molding intersects the pins that are used to hold in our ramrod and entry pipes. Our barrel itself is held to the stock with a set of brass barrel keys. Barrel keys became a replacement for barrel pins used to hold the barrel to the stock. The keys over time proved to be easier to remove, safer to remove, lessening wear on the stock in some cases and making for an easier overall cleaning experience on the rifle. Traveling back to our side plate mortise, we have two lock bolts, one at the center of our side plate and another at the front of our side plate. These are slotted screws or bolts, and round heads are present on these bolts. We have a small screw, I believe, at the rear of this side plate, not used to hold the lock together, simply used to hold the tail of this side plate to the stock. The side plate itself is brass and does not feature any decorative engraving. Our side plate mortise is very similar in shape and execution to the mortise seen around our lock plate on the other side. Behind our side plate mortise, we step then into the nose of our crest and back to the real crescendo of the composition that is this American long rifle. Here, as our molding line travels back into the buttstock on this side, that molding line transitions into a tight C-scroll that overlaps, travels and flows forward, almost in line with the curve seen at the end of our trigger guard. That same curve traveling around the nose of the crest of the rifle travels back about 1/3 of the way underneath our cheek piece before terminating in a nice bulb. Underneath the cheek piece at the intersection of the buttstock and the cheek piece cavity here, we have a small rectangular border carved along the cheek piece, adding some extra texture and contrast between the cheek piece and the stock underneath. Our cheek piece is a well-defined cheek piece that shows some wear and highlight here in the finish, indicating again that this piece saw some use in rubbing up against a marksman's cheek. We have a wear plate on this cheek rest made of brass, held on with two, again, what look like to be copper nails or tacks. And we see very similar engraving on this cheek piece plate as is seen on the patch box, where we have very light, very refined, very elegant, almost wispy engraving here, traveling from our second nail or tack at the rear forward to our first tack before the cheek piece plate itself terminates as almost a triangular point at the front. To the rear of the cheek piece, we have an example of what Peter Barry is known for here with his relief carving. We have a wonderful set of scrolls carved into this buttstock. Depending on the angle in which you are looking at this, you can see just how much material has been removed to give these scrolls their volume and their substance on this stock. It's really an incredible execution of this type of carving, especially for the period. If you catch the light right in the close-ups, you can even see some of the facets of the negative space between the scrolls, where you can see Barry's tool marks, in which he used tools to remove material to further accentuate the relief carved scrolls. Our uppermost scroll flows backwards. We have a curl coming up to the top crest of the rifle, and then we have two tines of the same scroll traveling back, one down, the other up into the heel point of the stock. We have a C scroll traveling forwards to backwards. The rear scroll on this C has a nice floral motif carved around it, accenting the curl at the end of the stock. Underneath this scroll, we have another leaf scroll traveling down and through the toe of the stock. Forward from this C scroll, we have another scroll traveling underneath the cheek piece, where we can then see an incised, undulating line traveling forward, bringing the eye back to the cheek piece, where it can travel again up through the wrist carving, along the crest of the rifle, and back to the tang and the relief carved tang area, sending our eye once again, much like a painting, through the composition of the entire piece. I'd like to thank the Rock Island Auction Company for giving me the opportunity to share this historic piece of muzzleloading history with you. If you'd like to learn more about this or any other antique arm, I encourage you to visit the Rock Island Auction Company YouTube channel to learn more. Because of the significance of this piece and the prominence of its builder, I will have additional high-quality photos with ruler measurements at ilovemuzzleloading.com to further assist in the documentation of Barry's work and the history of his craftsmanship. Once again, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you next time.